Hello and welcome to teacherfeedback.org. This is a new project, this is the very first video, so I'm looking forward to seeing how it pans out. My name's Jo Gakonga, I'm a teacher educator on an MA programme at Warwick University and I'm also a CELTA tutor. And this programme, this site, is for anybody who is involved in supervising and helping and supporting pre or in-service teachers, particularly if that involves giving feedback. So this might be CELTA tutors, for example, it might be school-based mentors, or it might be university-based teacher educators. And what I hope is that we can start some kind of conversation about giving feedback and about how to develop this really important skill. So when you initially become a teacher, there's usually a structured process that you go through. But when you make the transition to becoming a teacher of teachers, this isn't always the case. So I'm interested in what happens when you do this and what are the differences. So perhaps, obviously, you need a greater degree of knowledge about teaching. You're going to be a role model for new teachers, perhaps. You may feel that although you're a good practitioner, you don't have the theoretical background to back that up. Another thing that you need is you need to develop a personal pedagogy for this new subject. So instead of teaching your subject, which might be very familiar to you, you're teaching about teaching. So there's a very strong element of this being skills-based. So for those of us who come from a language teaching background, this isn't very unfamiliar. You know, we're used to teaching language using language. So there's a similarity there with teaching about teaching, I think. Another major difference, at least for some teachers, is that you're working with adults and not with children or teenagers. And so inevitably, this requires a different set of interpersonal skills. And connected with that, I think, is that as well as being a mentor or a supporting figure, it's quite likely that you'll be in the position of assessor. And this obviously changes the power balance quite considerably. And I think that learning to deal with this is a really important part of the transition. Another good question is, how does it happen? So I think a common route is that you're a good teacher. So you're assumed to have the right skills. So then maybe you're asked to mentor a new colleague or you volunteer to run a workshop and suddenly, hey presto, you're a trainer. This has been called anticipatory socialisation. I thought it was quite nice. If you're lucky, you might have some kind of formal training. I've done a bit of research into this and there's really not very much in the literature. These are some examples of some courses that I have found, but it's certainly not uncommon that people don't have any formal training, and if they do, it's rather short. It might also take the form of some kind of apprenticeship. You shadow someone more experienced than you are, and then you go on and do the same thing. I think that's quite common. I think that what happens quite often, though, is that you're just thrown in the deep end and you're expected to swim, hopefully with the support of some colleagues initially, but you just are expected to do it. And this, I think, is particularly the case with giving feedback. For me, genuinely, this is the most challenging thing I do professionally. It's always different and there's always different things to think about. I've done CELTA trainer in training. I've done an MA programme in which I did a teacher education module. I've certainly done a lot of reading about feedback and I've been doing it for 17 years, but I still feel as if it's something that I'm continually learning about. I think it's particularly challenging because there's so many different factors that are involved. So you have to weigh up the amount of support that's needed at any one time. And this depends on, for example, the teacher's stage of development. It might be that's for pre-service and in-service teachers. And connected to this is whereabouts on this continuum does your feedback sit? So how much advice do you give people? How much do you tell people what to do? And how much do you encourage them to reflect on their own practice and find their own way? So of course some of this will depend on you as a trainer, what kind of person you are, your own persona and your teaching beliefs as well. And I think it's probably quite important to be aware of these things. And of course, inevitably, your relationship with the person that you're giving feedback to is going to have a major impact on how you conduct that feedback. Of course, there are lots of other factors, what happened in the lesson yesterday, other external factors that are not connected to the teaching at all, whether the sun's shining or not, seriously. All sorts of things make a difference to how you're going to conduct this feedback to make it most successful, to make it so that people can accept and can see what you're saying and what they need to see from their lesson so that they can move forward. I think one of the issues about feedback is that it's almost always conducted behind metaphorical and physically closed doors. I really like the idea that my feedback might be conducted behind this particular door. It isn't usually, clearly. But the point is that you don't often get the opportunity for someone to observe your feedback. It's very rare, certainly, that's my experience. And consequently, you very rarely get feedback on your feedback. So given that, how do you improve? Of course, there's no one right way, and I've certainly got no warrant to tell you how to do it, but I think that there aren't many places where we consider our feedback and share our thoughts on it. And so that's what I'm really hoping that this website might be able to address, in a small way at least. So I'd like to issue a call to action. Here it goes. The next time you give feedback, record it and then listen back, and perhaps if you're feeling keen, transcribe a bit of it. You can record it, of course, with most mobile phones, so that's very easy. And listening back to yourself is a really useful way of reflecting on the process. If you do transcribe it, I'd say that seeing what you say on paper is very, very powerful. So if you've never done that before, I'd really recommend it. It does take some work and time, of course, but it is worth it, even if you only do, a short section of your feedback, I'd say. This isn't a picture of Ken Zeitner, I have to say, but I just like the picture. And Ken Zeitner suggests that self-study is probably the single most significant development in the field of teacher education research. Basically, this is probably the best method you can use to help improve your practice, I think. Even if it can be sometimes quite uncomfortable. So when you've done that, or even before, why don't you write a comment underneath and share with us how you feel about feedback? Do you get feedback on your feedback? What do you see as the challenges of feedback? I'd really like a conversation to start here, so please feel free to say something to us. If you've got this far, thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you're going to be part of this whole project. I'm planning on putting up a video about once a month, which hopefully will provide a bit of a spark, a bit of food for thought, and will then generate a conversation about our practices about giving feedback, and I hope that'll be useful. Anyway, I look forward to seeing what you have to say, and thank you very much for listening. Bye bye.